In Nebraska, water is managed by two separate but equally important groups. The Nebraska Department of Natural Resources, who manages surface water, and the 23 Nebraska Natural Resource Districts that manage groundwater. LB 962, passed in 2004, brings the two together to manage surface water and groundwater conjunctively. These are their stories.
Hi everybody, it's Alexa Davis. I'm here at the Lewis Clark NRD with Annette. And Annette, do you want to introduce yourself and give some background on your NRD?
Sure. I'm Annette Sudbeck, General Manager at the Lewis Clark Natural Resources District. We're in northeast Nebraska, and the community of Hartington is our home base. We serve 3 counties, Cedar, Dixon, and the eastern half of Knox. And we have about 1 million acres in our district. Approximately 1/5 of that is irrigated. Some history: the Lewis Clark Natural Resources District is the only district that isn't named after a river basin, and that's because at one of the very first board meetings, the district decided to take a different path and change the name to the Lewis and Clark Natural Resources District. Our original name was the Upper Missouri Tributaries Basin,
That's
NRD.
such a mouthful.
It is, isn't it? I'm sure that's why they changed it, the Upper Missouri Tributaries Basin. So that's a unique thing about the Lewis and Clark NRD is they changed their name. The only one to do that. They did that about 1972.
Don't you have do you have like the Lewis and Clark like bike trail up here?
Right. We have, when you talk about a trail, it's the Missouri River Trail on the river. So we actually have a kayaking canoe trail that's been identified on the river itself. And we also have Lewis and Clark Lake that's impounded by Gavin's Point Dam, which is the smallest of the reservoirs on the Missouri River and also the smallest dam, but it's at the end of the system, so it has probably the most impact on the river downstream as far as letting water out. Nobody can let too much out into that district or into that lake in order to manage river flows, which was important during the recent flooding that they held water back. So all of the structures upstream had to hold a significant amount of water back also. We do have 50 watershed structures in Dixon County that help minimize the impact of all the rainfalls that we've been receiving. The last one was constructed in 2004. And the first one was constructed in the late 60s. And that was one of the main projects that was undertaken by the Lewis and Clark NRD in partnership with NRCS, DNR, for funding to complete those structures. It's really protected the communities of Newcastle and Ponca and reduced damage to structures and such as roads and people's homes, bridges in the northern part of Dixon County. On a routine basis, we get some pretty big rainfalls in Dixon County. We also have 2 structures in Cedar County that we partnered with the Environmental Trust and with DNR to build in the 80s. So they provide protection as well from the floods. And the other dam that functions in Cedar County is called Chalk Rock, and DNR continues to help on that when it comes to maintenance of those structures that we built to protect the public with routine inspections, making sure things are operating properly. And if there's concerns, they let us know, help us find the right people to repair those if need be. They're just there to talk about anything that goes wrong on those dams, and things go wrong on dams all the time because you have rodents that like to dig in them, you have cattle that like to go across them, and make trails, and things get caught on them all the time. So it's been great to work with DNR on that as well. One of our most recent projects, this is probably the newest project we have in the Lewis and Clark NRD. We've worked with the Water Sustainability Fund through DNR to establish funding to benefit producers who farm in the Bow Creek watershed or have livestock in the Bow Creek watershed. The concern is high E. coli levels in the stream, which is typically sourced from manure that's either applied on the land surface or from cattle in their pastures that leave it behind for the rain to move down into their streams. We've worked with the Water Sustainability Fund and through the Environmental Trust as well as NDEE to secure funding to work with producers to adopt practices to minimize that impact from the rain and from the cattle. Through that process, we've been able to develop a partnership with UNL. Their students come up from a capstone class once a year. This will be the 4th or 5th year, I believe. And about 25 students come up with their professor, Andrea Beisch, and they break down into like 5 groups that are connected with producers in the Bow Creek watershed. And they spend 2 days getting to know each other, and the students ask the producers questions about their farming practices. They focus on learning about the impairment in the Bow Creek watershed, and then they work on finding mechanisms that they recommend to the farmers that they could implement to address the water quality, maybe improve their profitability, reduce their impact to water quality through their practices. It's a nice kind of a marriage of the two groups coming together, discussing issues, working out potential solutions, and then seeing what the farmers do afterwards. Sometimes it's profitability has been the driver, and so they want to look for ways to increase what they're able to earn from their existing acres, what they can reduce, if they can try different crop rotations. And then they always tie the water quality side into that. What can they do, quality and quantity? What can they do when they're farming to make better use of their water or to better protect their water? How can they reduce their expenses going into it, but increase what their yield is, increase their profit? It may not always be directly related to a higher yield, but less inputs. So it's been an interesting process. We've had some producers that have gone through the process with the students a couple different times because they've enjoyed it so much and they've learned from them so much, and they still come back every year to our dinners and listen to what's going on. Water Sustainability Fund has also supported our field days where we get 70 to 80 people per event, and we focus on different ways to improve soil health has been one of our primary focus. Changing your farming practices to increase profitability and not to have a negative impact on your soils, which is a challenge to have people be willing to take that risk. It usually means a risk in your profitability, potentially at first. Changing ways can be scary when it takes so much money to farm. It takes a lot of money to farm. Mm-hmm. We work to make sure that they have different cost share programs they can participate in through NRCS or through our programs right here at the NRD that are supported by our grants, but it's still a huge step to take. And I commend those producers that have started that process and are changing to improve soil health, water quality, their bottom line. It's an important step to take. Our water is too important to not protect and take those steps, but you also got to be able to stay on the farm to get that done. So one of the projects we've worked on to identify our groundwater resources and their extent is AEM surveys, which are aero electromagnetic surveys, which is a loop flown under a helicopter that sends signals into the ground that are returned to the loop to help identify the different layers of our hydrogeology or of our geology. And that helps to identify where water resources are and in what type of formation they are in. It's been very important in the Lewis and Clark NRD because our groundwater resources are very diverse. We have at least 5 different aquifers that water is drawn from in the Lewis and Clark NRD. And in some areas, especially to the northern part of our district, water is very challenging to find of good quality. You can find lots of water in the Missouri River alluvium or in the deeply buried Dakota aquifer. The Missouri River alluvium quality is poor for drinking anyway, good for irrigation. But as you go down into the Dakota, the water is usually not as palatable for drinking as a drinking water source, plus it's expensive to pump from that deep. AEM surveys have been very beneficial for the Lewis and Clark NRD to find the areas where water is at. We help producers that are looking for developing irrigation. It's also been helpful in finding groundwater sources. The AEM surveys were completed in part with water sustainability funds, which has been helpful for our entire district. The Lewis and Clark NRD partners with DNR on a couple stream gauges in the district to monitor water levels on the Bow Creek, which is part of our project for the E. coli in the streams. And we also have one on the Bazille Creek in the northwest part of our district. One other stream gauge that we have that's interesting that both DNR and USGS on is the stream gauge on Bazille Creek, where nitrate-laden water coming from the Bazille groundwater management area flows into the Missouri River. I guess the last thing I have is if you're interested in learning more about the Lewis and Clark NRD, that you can find us on the web at DNR.Nebraska.gov, or you can reach us by calling at 402-254-6758.